Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session titled Games to Reality, Funding the Dream During a Pandemic. My name is Mahmoud Hawila, and as a criminal barrister, I am well in my comfort zone, being the one who's asking questions here, so you can consider this a cross-examination of our three eminently qualified panel members
I
here
didn't
to
do
guide
it.
us through here to guide us through how to get a new game off the ground. So the guy who did it, that's Nick. He's a lawyer who spent several years in private practice, assisting developers in both the board game and digital game sectors. Nick's experience with banking, finance, commercial law, and IP, which is intellectual property, has allowed him to assist and grow startups as well as help larger developers with multinational agreements for sale and distribution of their games. Nick specializes in privacy and data law and is currently legal counsel for large Australian technology firm Ethan Group. Also on screen, we have Shannon Kelly, an award-winning game designer and the owner of Foxtail Games. His games Lucidity, Six-Sided Nightmares, and Runica and the six-sided spellbooks have sold over 50,000 copies worldwide. Welcome, Shannon.
Hello.
And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Lucy, Senior Manager of PwC Australia, and she's in the business recovery and restructuring practice there. Lucy specializes in insolvency, corporate simplification, and managed wind downs. Lucy is a CA, a chartered accountant, and has more than 9 years experience working closely with companies and individuals in the small and medium enterprise sector who are experiencing financial difficulty or require assistance in restructuring their entity. And that'll come into a lot of use here because we'll be going through how to get your game idea off the ground in the midst of a pandemic. Very timely. So we've got a great idea. What do we do? Shannon, do you want to start us off with trying to get our idea into reality?
Sure, yeah. So a lot of the time, the first sort of ideas that you have end up coming out because you're playing another game, or you just sit down with some bits of paper and you start crafting out something cool with just an idea you had. Maybe you build on it, maybe you show it to your friends or your family, and maybe one of them says, "Hey, this is really cool. You should try and put this out into the world. Maybe make some money out of it, but definitely kind of pursue it." And so that's kind of where we end up, where you sit down and you think, okay, I guess I'll do it. I have this scrap of paper and I want to turn it into something that has a cardboard box attached to it and sits on a game store shelf. And so I think the first thing that you do need to work out is what you actually want out of your game. Do you want something that your friends and family can play at Christmas time, or is it something that you sell on the side, maybe at conventions or through an online web store to make a bit of extra income? Do you want something you can pitch to publishers and start getting involved in that side of the business? Or do you want this to be the first or the kind of magnum opus game in your vast business empire that you build up and then sell off for millions of dollars to one of the big kind of game developing
See, I think most
businesses?
of us would fall in that category. You know, we all want to get rich quick. I'm sure we've all had fantastic ideas that we'd want to bring to market. So, you know, if we do want to take our idea and let it skyrocket, what's the first thing you suggest we do, Shan?
Well, the really when you're thinking about building something massive and turning kind of a small idea into something huge, strangely, I don't know, you kind of almost don't want to start out with your massive idea that's going to take a lot of risk, a lot of personal investment. Sometimes maybe you want to start out with something small. I don't know, Lucy probably knows a bit more about that in terms of business structures and how to actually start small.
Okay, yeah, let's bring Lucy into it. Lucy, we've got this great idea. We want to eventually grow our gaming empire, but what should we do from the business structuring side of things?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of business structures and starting out, I mean, most people will probably start out by themselves, or they might have a friend or a business partner that is like-minded that they want to go into business with. So there's a few different structures that you can choose. They can be as simple as you want them, or they can be as complex. They can be as cheap to start or expensive. Most people will probably start out as a sole trader. So that's an individual. That's you. You're running the business. It's the simplest. It's the most cheapest way to get off the ground. So that's you actually running the business. And part of structures and choosing one is also just understanding, from a tax perspective, what does that mean to you personally? Are your assets protected? And what are the costs in doing that? You can also, if you're doing and going at it with a friend, you can enter into a partnership. And when you enter into a partnership, you want to make sure you get that right from the start. So when you're going into business with somebody, you're both going to have, you want to make sure your goals are aligned. You're going to know, or you want to know how you're going to run the business together, who's going to share the costs, or how you're going to distribute the profits. What happens if you have a dispute? There should be some sort of mechanism, a partnership agreement in place to just guide you through any bumpy roads, or just how that partnership is going to work. And the other way you could start your idea is actually just starting a company. It's a little bit more, costs a little bit more, but a company is actually a separate legal entity. A company is the where you see proprietary limited, Pty Ltd, after a company name, and that one will give you the most asset protection. Because it's a separate legal entity. You're not trading as yourself. And as someone that started out with an idea to start my own business, I started out as a sole trader because it was something just that was simple, and it was something small, and you're not stuck to one structure. As I grew, my comfort level to wanting to trade in my own name I grew anxious, and I decided to set up my own proprietary limited company so that I could have all of that isolated in a separate legal entity, and I could still go about my day job, and sort of not try and mix business and pleasure together, and I had it all just separate. So again, just determined, business structure might be determined your appetite for risk, how big, how small you are. Do you want to be protected? How you want to, how fast you want to grow, or whether you just want to start out small and, start up
So
something with little costs.
you've opened up a successful business, Lucy, and you advise businesses day to day through PwC, and you've seen businesses skyrocket to fame and fortune, and you've also saved businesses which were on the brink of collapse.
Correct.
Let's say bare bones, we've got this idea, we want to get it off the mark, we want to get started with the idea. How much money are we talking if we want to approach this as a sole trader? What do we need in our pocket?
You can start off with as little as in your pocket, and most people, maybe your average, maybe your average mum and dad company might start off with something small. You don't have to have thousands and thousands of dollars, and most people might not have thousands and thousands of dollars. You're going to grow your business relative to the funds that you have available, and to get off the ground, I think everything starts with an idea, and it starts with planning. You're not going to go out with that big idea straight out the gate. You've got a little bit of money here. What can I do with that? You work within your means, and you grow from there.
And so let's say, we've got this great idea. We start off, with this humble sole trader structure, and we start to see the fruit of our labor. Is it hard to transition from one business structure to another? Say if we want more protections from litigation, or if we want to start trading in a separate company name, is it difficult to transition?
No, it's not difficult. It's not difficult at all. I managed to do that personally with my own business, I had a lot of questions. I'm an accountant that still needed an accountant to help me guide me through that process, and I was still nervous about how to go about that. And I just put in a simple call to an accountant. We had an hour-long phone conversation. It was relatively inexpensive. It only cost a few $100s, but they really put my mind at ease and helped my stress levels there. And it was really, really simple. It was just a matter of spending, I think it was about $1,500 to get a company set up. And I just gave them a stock list and how I wanted, who I wanted the director to be and the shareholders. And there we go. They set me up with a MYOB, an ABN, a tax file number, and I just go about my business the same that I did before.
And just before I get on to Nick, is it your advice that people seek advice and put in sort of the effort trying to get all this planning done and get all the taxes and corporate structuring sorted before they start chasing their dream?
Yes, I think planning early and planning from the onset is extremely important. And as this conversation, as we get deeper into it, we'll always probably be referring back to planning. But just talking to an accountant or even a legal advisor, it's setting it up from the start, particularly when you're going to maybe go into business with someone, or you might not understand the finances of it. It can just really help you make the right decisions from the start. That later down the track, that you made the right decision at the start, and it might help you go, navigate through some bumps down the road.
All right. So on that note, sorry, Shannon, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and ask, when you talk about a business plan, do you mean like a 500-page Bible of exactly where you're going to set up, or do you mean like a napkin written at a bar where you're like, I would like to make $1 million? Like, where are we on the scale here for making a
Yeah.
board game company?
Yeah. Look, a business plan doesn't have to be 500 pages, and I'm sure probably writing 500 pages might be a bit demotivating, but some people might be so motivated to get their product out there that they think they know everything. But look, a business plan is just, it's a document that, helps you be able to prioritize what your goals are, where you want to take your business. It can be very daunting starting your own business, and you can get very lost in everything that's happening. And being able to have a document that you wrote that sort of set out and planned what your steps were going to be, what your goals were, what you wanted to achieve, and how you were going to do it can be something that you can refer back to. And in times where you sort of lost yourself, it'll help you ground yourself, but it also give you more of a top-down bird's eye view of your business, a different perspective that you wrote at the start. That when everything's all hectic, you're a bit confused. You can just go back to it and you're like, okay, nope, yep, we're good. This is what we're doing, and we're going well.
And it's
Thanks
probably
for
worth
that.
adding the business plan itself it's a living document, right? Like it's a document that grows with you. Day one is obviously very different to day 100, and it's exciting to see how that grows. And I suppose at the very end of it all, it also tells you when it's time to wrap it up. If you succeed all your goals, is that your cue to cash out and get rich quick?
And that for
Non-patent
everyone
infringing.
listening, that's our legal eagle, Nick Cummins, speaking to you. And Nick, you haven't escaped cross-examination on this point. I mean, we've spoken to our award-winning developer, and we've spoken to our chartered accountant and self-starting successful business owner. But let's say I've got a great idea. I've spoken to Lucy and obtained some good accounting advice, and I've spoken to Shannon to try to get some mentoring. You're the legal eagle. What legal things do I need covered beyond just simple corporate structuring and having a business plan?
Well, look, there's a lot to it, but fortunately, you can take it as at your own pace. Now, fortunately, the first thing, if you ever speak to a lawyer, and I do encourage everyone to speak to a lawyer, because they, like any advisor, are there to help you. They're not there to just take your money and say, "Aha," like the cliche lawyer. Much like an accountant, and in fact, a lawyer will usually tell you to see an accountant first, because the tax implications of what structure you pick is sometimes more important than the legal obligations, at least in the immediate term. What I would say though is, when you're talking about getting set up, the first thing to note is, if you've made that decision that Shannon was talking about, if you've made the decision that you want to sell a game, and the second you sell a game, you're in business, right? And that means all the wonderful world of business, all the rules regarding businesses, they now apply to you. So when we talk about liability, we talk about risk, all of these things start becoming important. Now, it's important to understand that as a sole trader, there's certain risks, and as a company, there's certain risks. There's also a lot of benefits that go with it. But what I'd say is you need to know that these things exist, because the number of times I've seen clients which said, oh, well, I didn't do something, and then then I said to the customer that they should go jump in the lake. And then the customer came back to me and I got in a lot of trouble personally. You say, yes, that's because you're not a company. You kept saying to everyone that you're Joe's Games or whatever you were calling yourself, but you're not a company. And so how liability works is different for you.
So
So
Nick, um, just take me through this, right? What's the biggest liability that faces these startup gaming companies or sole traders? Like, and I'm sure Lucy can speak to this as well, and Shannon through your experience. But Nick, like, what's the stumbling block that these startups often face?
look, I'd probably say if you want to get the number one liability, it's getting your tax wrong. And Lucy and Shannon can probably speak more directly to how fun tax and GST and all those wonderful things are. It's a lesser thing for the lawyers, but in terms of things which aren't tax, right? Because tax is a wonderful area to itself. You're looking at things like when you're producing games, if you're manufacturing a physical product, well, now you got to think about your product liability. You got to think about returns and warranties, and does the Australian consumer law apply to you? And that's a thing that we as individuals use all the time. For all those who are watching within the wonderful state of Australia and perhaps overseas, the Australian consumer law is this wonderful piece of consumer protection law, which says that companies can't do certain things, and if they do, they're going to replace the product or they're going to refund it. And if you haven't accounted for refunds, then you can very quickly find yourself out of money. Your business can die before it started. Now, if you're in the digital space, you're making a digital game, you're making an app. Okay, well, same thing applies. Do you have to give refunds? Is it defective? Does it break my iPhone if I use an iPhone when I when I play with it? Do you walk into the No Man's Sky case, if the people remember that game, which actually had a group of people try to complain to the ACCC, the Australian Competition Consumer Regulator, for breach of those consumer warranties. They said, this game is so rubbish on launch, we all want a refund.
Okay, so we know what not to do, and I'm certainly not going to take up your offer to talk about tax. Sorry, Lucy, but that is something that I'd be calling an accountant or chartered accountant for. But all of this stuff costs big money, particularly once you are moving from that planning phase into your first sort of project years. After you received great advice, you received a bit of mentoring, a bit of leadership advice. Um, Shannon, I haven't heard from you in a while. Can you just tell me, like, we've got this great idea, we've got some people interested, we've set up our corporate structure, we've got someone like Nick to tell us, look, these are all the legal issues that you need to cover off on, ensure you're protected. But we've got the structure now, and we've still got this idea. We're a bit of money into the idea. How do we move forward from here to get a bit more money to uh, increase our product's life cycle and try to um, build a sustainable enterprise?
Sure. So I guess for people who kind of come to this with no idea of what a board game costs to produce, it is free to go to manufacturers and ask for quotes. You have to send them the exact specifications that you want done, but most manufacturers will be very happy to give you a rough estimate of what the game that you are building will cost. So almost from the outset, you can start looking into what different components are worth, and maybe you decide at that point that you don't need 512 cards in your game, and you can instead start out with 128 or somewhere a little bit more reasonable. Cardboard is expensive and is getting more and more expensive, which is something that the industry will eventually have to deal with. In general, if you want a rough idea from the ground floor, take any game that you're buying in a store and its recommended retail price, and then divide that by anywhere between 5 to 8 times. So a game that's worth $80 is probably going to be worth somewhere between $10 to $15 from the minute it's manufactured to the cost of getting it freighted to your warehouse.
And
So
that's
that's
just
all.
manufacture,
That
right?
is just
That's
manufacture,
all of those
manufacture and
overheads.
freight as well.
And
But
all of those
you're
overheads in starting up. Sorry to speak over you. All of those overheads in starting up, like the tax structuring, the legal structuring, all of that, we've sort of got to pay that on our own because it's not even built into the cost, is it?
yes, so you do need to start with, well, from somewhere. And sometimes you might be building as a sole trader, in which case you don't have all of those legal costs. You can get legal advice from Arts Law or go on to IP Australia's website. You can do a lot of stuff yourself free. It's just that, again, that eats into your time. And so at one point you have to start valuing your own time and deciding, is it worth me going to an an advisor who will be able to give me all of this information a lot quicker and a lot more correctly than I could find out myself. So yeah, you do need to start, and even from the beginning, you need to market your game and you need to create review copies to send out to reviewers. So there are a lot of costs, I think, that people don't really consider, right down to, I want to go to this convention, I need to get car fuel and parking for the weekend.
Now, Shannon, let's say we've approached a few of the manufacturers and they've given us a price per unit. And let's say we want to sort of go this on our own and see whether we can raise the funding ourselves. What platforms have you seen used to success?
I think the two biggest for the board game space are Kickstarter and GameFound at the moment. Indiegogo is another one that some people use, but the benefit at the moment of using Kickstarter and GameFound, which the latter of which is kind of the newer one on the market, is that they are kind of half capital, or not capital, kind of half money raising and half marketing advertising. So because of the nature of them, a lot of people who are interested in new board games will be looking at what new things are on those websites. So you kind of have a little bit of your marketing done for you. And because they only take 10% of the final amount, roughly 10%, then you end up being able to budget for that much and makes it a little bit more certain about what sort of money you're going to get in.
Thanks, Shannon. And now, Nick, I want to bring you in here because if we're throwing this idea onto a platform like Kickstarter, if we are putting some effort into marketing, if we are approaching manufacturers, our idea is going public effectively, and there are risks involved in that. Who's going to stop someone from taking my idea from me? And if they're more cashed up or if they're quicker to market, they might cut me out of business. So, what can we do to protect ourselves before going public?
Well, look, there's a couple of things you can do. The sort of the tried and true is keep it secret. It might sound patently obvious, but you can keep some of your ideas secret. The trade-off is that then people won't know about your idea. So if your plan is to get reputation, then you need to do it in a way that is going to be acceptable. So, for example, you might try to restrict who sees your product. You may not put it online necessarily. You might start with local bricks and mortar stores to try and build that reputation to start with. Because if it ever comes up, oh, someone has stolen my idea, then you want people to be able to say, actually, these are some people who can demonstrate that they've seen it. They've seen my prototypes. And if it ever went to God forbid, a litigation case, you'd actually bring those people along and say, no, 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 this person saw me back in 2012 when I was doing it, and I've got the schematics to prove it. But there's some other things you can do as well. So you start talking about intellectual property. And this is where we start interacting with what corporate structure you picked, because ownership of intellectual property follows your corporate structure. So if you're a sole trader and you say, okay, I've developed this idea, I've now got copyright in this work that's come from the idea, then okay, you've now got copyright and you can try to enforce your rights.
But what is copyright, Nick? Tell us. Just give us some free legal advice here. Well, you're saying copyright. You're saying intellectual property. You're throwing around these words. I'm a criminal barrister. Help me out. What are we talking about? I see the C on behind the logos. I see the T. Yeah, but what is that? Who do we register with, and what does it cost?
So look, I'll speak very generally because copyright is an area unto itself where everyone's heard about a copyright case, and it's big money. Hopefully, you never walk down that path, but it's important to know about it and essentially go get a lawyer for some more advice if is sort of the online world can't answer your immediate question. But essentially, copyright is a type of property. It's intangible usually, and it's this idea that you get rights in a physical representation or a representation of a work. Now, I'm using these words very generally because they are to a certain extent. So, you're thinking of things like a literary work, you're looking at even computer coding. It's something that can take a representation, it can't be an idea. Oh, well, I came up with the idea for the greatest game in the world. So, that's great. But if you haven't represented that somehow, then you don't have anything. So copyright it seems a little anomalous in that respect. It's often confused with trademarks. Now, trademarks, as different to a representation of a work, is you've got think brands, think brand names, think brand logos. Those are all likely trademarks. It is essentially a mark of your trade. If you look on the back of a plate, a dinner plate, you'll probably see there's a mark on the back. Maxwell and Williams. Some bits of metal used to have it. It's this old idea that your blacksmith would stamp things and say, "Ah, yes, there's my mark." So the idea is that trademarks are quite powerful because it is your brand. It is intimately linked with who you are and your brand and your reputation. And Shannon will be able to tell you, reputation, especially in say board game industry, can actually be worth more than anything else that you produce because people who know you and know what the brand means. Think McDonald's. That is a brand and it is titanic in its size and scale. I'll come back to this later on, but protecting your IP and knowing what your IP is and actually writing down your IP, keeping a register of it, really important, especially when we talk later about how you might use or how you might leverage your IP.
All I'm really
Okay.
hearing there is that I probably have a very little chance of getting the many Harry Potter branded games on Kickstarter that I've backed from people with no other creations behind them.
It's completely legitimate from JK Reeling.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think it's important in the board game space to remember that as scary as it is to share your things around, that does, number one, put you on the map with other people. And because you do build a reputation for it, people are, what's the good word for trolling? People are fiercely protective of the creators that they like. And so if they see someone else taking your idea, then they will be quite vicious sometimes in making sure that that other idea, that everyone knows that they weren't the first person to create that. So I think it can be quite scary to share your things online, but at the same time, it's important to remember that all of those other board game creators are on there because they have their one grand idea that they really want to make made. And so they don't have time to steal other people's grand ideas to make things. They're completely occupied with their own. So
I
the
think that strikes
chances.
a nice balance. I think
Hmm.
that strikes a really nice balance. What you're saying or what Nick's saying. Nick's saying, document your IP, make sure your ideas are written down, they're represented right. And Shannon's saying, but don't be too cautious and paranoid. Put yourself out there, build your reputation, build some great contacts and your goodwill with people, and the community might back you. But Lucy, I haven't heard from you in a while. How long will it take us to get profitable? How long will it be until I start seeing some money flow from this idea? Will it be after the first project? Will it be before the first project even goes live? What are we talking here in terms of timeline to get back in green?
Look, I mean, you start a business to make a profit. That's why you're doing it. Or you can, I mean, many people start a business out of passion and love, but majority of you people are starting it to make a profit. And I think look, you've got to go into it with an expectation here that you're likely not going to make a profit in your first year, and it might take 18 months. It might take 24 months, and I think to safeguard a new or established business, I think you need to understand what can lead to business failures so that you can navigate and manage those obstacles. And business failures, lack of capital up front, lack of funding, not having inadequate cash flow or high business expenditure. I think this is where it comes down to budgets. And I think as you and Shannon were talking about, you go out, you get your quotes from your manufacturers, how much is it going to cost? But then you've also got all these overheads to factor in. And if, the disconnect between business owners and their finances, there are a lot of businesses out there where the business owners have such a big disconnect between what their finances are and what's actually happening in their business. And it can have such a dire consequence and can put you out of operation really quickly if you have, you haven't looked at your budget, or you haven't done a cash flow. And this is where this, the idea of knowing that you're not going to probably make a profit in your first year or your first 1.5 years, where it's so important when you are very much at the, you're at the start of your business, you need so much capital and funding up front that you need to plan that out. You need to have your budgets, you need to know your cash flow, you need to know where your money's being spent, because you can find yourself very, stuck very quickly if you have no idea what's happening, from the finance perspective. And the amount of people that I have interviewed, directors, individuals who have gone, unfortunately, bankrupt, the amount that say they went bankrupt because of their business, they just relied on their accountant, or they let their wife do the books. They wouldn't be able to tell you really at any point in time what their balance sheet looked at. Were they actually making a profit? So understanding your obligations as a business owner and a director, and getting your finances in order from the start, it's going to put you in a better financial position to hopefully succeed and navigate through the bumps of starting a new business.
So does that sort of bring us back to what Nick was saying about how the business plan is meant to be this living document, and part of that business plan should be planning expenditures, planning how long we're going to be in the black and how long it's going to take us to start making a profit, and planning when these big expenditures such as manufacturing or increasing our product size or scope, is that when this all comes in, Lucy?
Yeah, every business needs an evolving business plan. Every business needs a tool where they can produce reports, so they can actually check in and how their business is going, and be able to make decisions close to as real time as possible if something isn't going right. They've got those reporting mechanisms in there. They've planned for it potentially ahead of time, and they can maybe put in some form of mechanism to navigate around it and hopefully get through to the other side. But and not sure if this is a point to bring up in terms of funding. I mean, even most businesses, when they're starting out, they're going to have a nil balance sheet, and probably approaching a bank is going to be quite difficult to get a bank loan. But if you're starting out small, you don't have much in terms of capital. You're starting out very small. You're slowly growing. Having tools, a business plan, cash flows, budgets, they're tools that you need to be able to approach banks or approach smaller funders. They're going to want to know where you're taking this business, how well is it performing, are you someone that is safe that I can lend my money to, knowing that I can get it back.
And it's probably worth mentioning on that, Lucy, that I mean, I personally know that when Shannon was doing his first Kickstarter, there was a lot of work that Shannon, and he can talk to that, put into it. But if you from the legal perspective, a Kickstarter is very similar to a prospectus. It's similar to how you raise money on the ASX. You've got to put all this information out there about what you're doing, how you're doing it, what your risks are, what's going to happen, when are you going to get it. Um, and so it's all this information, and information makes you very attractive because people who look like they know what they're doing end up getting money. So whether it's Kickstarter, whether it's a bank, whether it's an angel investor who comes along and says, I will give you 8 million because I just like your game, But they don't do it just based on your idea. They say, the idea got me in. Now I want to see that you'll actually get there, because there's no point me sinking money into this if you're just going to fall over tomorrow. But and angel investors are great because sometimes they bring with themselves connections and mentoring as well as the cash and ideas. So there's all those sorts of opportunities out there as well, all linked into your documents.
And Shannon, take me into your experience and take us all into chapter 3 after our first project. How do we go about, once we've built that goodwill, we've built that rapport in the gaming community amongst the manufacturers, amongst the resellers? Now we've got backing by some investors and our corporate structuring and our legal IP and all that's sorted. What do we start doing to build a sustainable business?
So I think, again, it comes back to really that business plan about what you want from your company, from your project, from your games. And that is an evolving thing. So you might start out thinking, well, I just want to create this one game and it's my baby and I've been working on it for 12 years. And now that it's out in the world, I think I'm done. You might decide to buy an extra 1,000 copies from your warehouse and put them in your garage or into a distributor's warehouse and have them sell it to all the game stores in your country. You might even get lucky enough to get a deal with the publisher overseas where they might stock things in their warehouse, or a distributor overseas, even better, because then you get even bigger share of the profit. But of course, then you do have to do all of the things the publisher was going to do, like marketing, going to trade shows, going to actually convince people to buy your game. You you kind of have to make the decision there of, do I make another game? Do I have any other ideas? Do I want to start taking other people's ideas and paying them royalties to create a game? Kind of, do I want to create a pipeline of different games that I will be working on one after another and make a career out of this, or am I done? And I think there's this idea that you have to turn your hobby into a career, and for some people that's great. That's the dream. But for some people, literally, that one game is what they wanted to do, and I think it's okay to take that and say, I've accomplished it.
I love that message. There's nothing wrong with the one-hit wonder. If that one task is what you set out to achieve and you make it and you reach your goal, you achieve your dream, it's something to be applauded. It doesn't mean it needs to be followed up and improved in circumstances where you're probably deviating from what you were planning. But tell me, Shannon, just from your experience, if we are deciding to build this one game and it's our life project, or if we're deciding to build many more, how do we go about establishing these distribution channels and sales channels, and how do we wander our way into knowing who to call, how much stock to get, when we should start thinking about changing suppliers? Like these are all very um, um, foreign things to me, but also really awkward things to discuss if you're new to the industry. Like we could all be gamers, but dealing with the actual manufacturers and game sellers is a different can of worms altogether, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, everyone who works on your project, from the manufacturer up to the distributor to the game stores, even including the backers who've bought your game to start with, everyone wants your game to succeed. They want to sell as many copies as they can because everyone gets a little bite of that sort of profit. Even your backers who bought the game, they want your game to succeed because they want it to be a good game. They actually want to have put money into something that they can share to friends, and those friends go, "Wow, you made a great choice with this." So I mean, if there's anyone who doesn't want you to succeed, maybe it's rival publishers, but I think the industry itself is pretty friendly and most people are happy to pat you on the back and go, yeah, awesome job. Like, this is really cool. I am a gamer myself, and I played it, and it's a great sort of project. How you actually get to that point, because it is such an inclusive and still quite small industry, having those mentorships, being curious, being willing to help other people with the things that you do know, kind of engenders that on the other side, that people are more willing to help you when either you ask for help, or quite often when you're not asking for help, but you're doing something obviously wrong. So it is helpful to kind of be part of the community, not just show up, say, hey, I'm making this game, here are all of the details, and that's your first and only post in that particular Facebook group or on that Reddit thread or wherever you are dropping yourself into and out of.
It's probably worth just noting there, Shannon, like in the digital space, I mean, we all play games, right? How many times have you read some of the gaming news and you hear, developer X, Y, and Z or story writer ABC has gone from insert game company name here to insert game company B or C or D, and they all move around because Microsoft has bought out Bethesda and Blizzard Entertainment has bought out someone else. You have these amalgamations, and people move through the industry. So the people, just like any industry, the people who you know today and who you've got goodwill with today might be working with you as your boss or subordinate tomorrow.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a bit of a penny arcade kind of don't be a dick. And that'll get you a long
language
way in the
warning.
industry.
And sorry, we can beep it. But Nick, like, all right, things are going great with backend. We've got great supply. We've got goodwill in the community. We've got our mentors lined up.
What kind of fantasy land are you running here?
Oh, hold on. I think we've got a great community. But tell me, the customer's not always right, but sometimes they are. Um, they call up, they want a refund, they want a return, they want to exercise their warranties. What do we do here?
Look, this is we sort of touched on it earlier, but it's for you as the person who's trying to get your game up and trying to keep it up. It's something that you just need to be aware of. Now, yes, you're going to need to make sure that you've got contracts in place. Please, ladies and gentlemen, if you do one thing, make sure that when you're dealing with someone above you in your supply chain, so your distributors, the people who are making your goods, you've got agreements in place. And the same goes going downwards towards your customer. You need customer facing agreements. Why?
Handshake
Because,
agreements?
I'm sorry?
Handshake agreement?
Oh, look,
What are we talking?
handshake's great, and a handshake can be a legally binding agreement, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, it just becomes a little hard to prove when you need to say, yes, but we agreed this. And that's also why when you start in business, as, as Lucy mentioned at the start, if you're doing a partnership based on a handshake, that's great while things are good. But no one reads an agreement until there's a problem. It's like the Constitution. No one reads it until you go, oh, actually, I need to know what it says. Can they do this? So look, warranties are something that you need to maybe budget for. You might even need to make sure that you've got insurance in place. So insurance is a thing that's often sort of a foreign element to most of us because you might have heard of your house insurance or your car insurance, but you probably haven't really had to deal with public liability and products insurance. Do you need it? Do you need cyber insurance? Do you need directors insurance? What are these things? How do they work? And one of the best people you can talk to is probably an advisor we haven't mentioned yet, which is your insurance broker. They are people who literally broker insurance. Their job is to know what insurance, and they will ask you a lot of questions about your business. Oh, hey, there's that business plan again. Good to have. Um, and they want to know all about you, so they can go, right, you need this insurance, and it'll cost you this much. Now, on day zero, insurance is probably going to seem like a lot, but very quickly it seems like a great bargain because, for X $1,000, you can get up to 20 million of public liability and products cover. It's more complicated than that. I'm sort of glossing over it, but the point is it doesn't cost you much to get a lot of protection. There is one other thing that's important to note, that if you're dealing locally or internationally, different laws will apply. And those different laws can be things like end of life obligations. If you think about trading into Europe or even California, certain American states, just to name a few, they will have laws which say, okay, yes, you've made this product, but it doesn't end when you sell it. It keeps going for the life of the product. You might have heard about this when we talk about, like, especially digital products, electronic phones and that sort of thing. The EU wants to make it so they're forced to be recyclable and that sort of thing. So some of these can catch you up, and guess what? You're going to need money for that. Um, if you're dealing internationally, you're going to need to know how those international laws apply to you. You know, EU has a lot of privacy laws, and it doesn't matter if you are a $1 company or you're a $1 billion company. The laws will apply to you.
So this issue of warranties, refunds, ensuring obligations with laws around the various countries we're trading in, insurance claims, these are really all day-to-day sort of liabilities that we should be planning for. And please do have written contracts with anyone that you are trading with. But Lucy, can you please do the honor of taking us into chapter 4? What happens when we're not talking about these day-to-day liabilities? We're talking about Doomsday. We're talking about extraordinary natural disasters. We're talking about pandemics and chip shortages and boats getting stuck and causing months and months of delay and billions of dollars to literally um, um, fall into the ocean. What do we do when trying to prepare for or deal with these unexpected encounters?
Yeah, pandemic's certainly one that I'm not sure a lot of businesses had planned for, unless you're Wimbledon. But look, when it comes to unexpected issues, you do need to factor in and pay some consideration to it. And I know I keep talking about planning and budgeting. You're going to have to consider that as a business owner and as someone that's running a business. You need to be able to have some sort of contingency plan. You can't go from day to day or paycheck to paycheck just hoping for the best. You need to have some emergency funds available. You need to have your accounts up to date, because if something goes wrong and you need to be able to pull funds from somewhere urgently, if your accounts aren't up to date, you're not going to know what's happening in your business. And particularly if you want to go and maybe tap some extra funding from banks or some people within your network, you're going to need to be able to produce reports very quickly to be able to show to the banks, all these funders, look, this has happened. I need XYZ of funding. We can take it from here. This, by forecast show we're profitable if we can just get that little bit of extra money, and all is well.
And so what here do we do then if we're facing this unexpected supply shortage? I mean, we're seeing this take place across industry, and we're seeing things being ordered at unprecedented rates online. It seems that everything's taking forever to arrive at our doorstep, and it seems that, I sound really privileged and in saying that, but I mean, pandemics and natural disasters cause supply chain disruption and shortages of supply. What do you suggest we do in preparation for that?
This is where having really good, you've got your contracts in place, but also having really good relationships with your suppliers, so that if something does go wrong, you're able to have at least, you have a good relationship. You've got more of, I guess, a leg to stand on when it comes to negotiating. I mean, stock shortages, if it happens, it's going to happen. Being able, on top of your finances, being someone that has at least a plan in place, you at least sort of have some sort of mechanism to try and get through that. I think we're talking earlier about a company called MetaZoo, which is a company that started and it did a Kickstarter campaign. It only produced XYZ worth of stock up front, and the actual trading card game was so popular. It had different pockets of consumers. It had people that actually wanted to play the card game. It had people that wanted to collect it. It had people that wanted to invest in it. Now, a lot of those stocks, a lot of the stock got snatched up by people who actually just wanted to invest and collect it, which meant your card game wasn't actually there for your player base. And growth can be a really good thing for a business, but growth could also be the death of a business, because you're all of a sudden you need you're in this issue where you need to rapidly expand. So you're going to be having a lot of expenses, and you're going to be going out there making a lot of investments. But what happens, in 6 months' time, when you finally got your whole production line up to date, you finally got the stocks, that stock shortage fixed, or your consumer base have moved on to the next best thing, and now you're stuck with a whole bunch of stock, a lot of expenses. So this is where you've got to have to really talk to your advisors, talk to your accountants. Again, cash flows, planning, budgeting. You when you have unexpected issues, there's going to be an inherent risk there, and it's just ever so important to again go back to your budgets, your cash flows, talk to your advisors.
So before I summon the legal ego on this issue, Shannon,
Yes.
is it that much of a natural disaster if our success is too rapid, too great?
Yeah, it's quite funny to think of before you are working on your game, because a lot of people plan what is going to happen if they don't fund, if they don't get enough money to make their product. What will they do? Will they refund? Will they put their own money into it? But not many people plan for what happens if they get 10 to 20 to 30 times the funding, and therefore the customers that they anticipated. So, let's say that you planned to raise $50,000, but instead you become one of the most popular Kickstarters of all time, and you raise $5 million. Your customers or your backers expect you to act now like $1 million company, because that's how much money you've earned. You suddenly have 100 times the emails coming in for customer support purposes that you thought you would just do yourself in between your day job. What do you do? How do you invest or hold that millions of dollars while you're waiting to put it into manufacturing? And what happens if the exchange rate bombs? And suddenly something that you might have been able to salvage yourself with your own finances becomes way bigger than you could possibly anticipate. And I'm using $1 million as an example, and that doesn't even buy you an apartment these days. But for a lot of people, having a $500 difference is massive. Like, that's the difference between being able to make a mortgage payment or a rent payment, or not. So it's very important, as crazy and as I think some people steer away from it because it sounds arrogant to plan to succeed beyond your wildest dreams. But it's very important to plan for that just in case, because you can get caught out and fail just as much from over succeeding in the funding sort of space as you can from under succeeding.
So do you know that you've made it once you buy a black turtleneck and then start looking really smug and wise on TV?
Pretty sure the last person to buy a black turtleneck and create a medical company is currently in court over it. So I don't know if the black turtleneck necessarily saves you from litigation. But one thing that I've found to be absolutely essential, and it's not a business plan. Sorry, Lucy. But what I've found is your reputation with your customers is being upfront and open and honest and always willing to kind of let them see behind the game box, see what goes into making this game. Because when you are always open and transparent and honest with people, then if you do run into trouble and you immediately front up and say, hey, look, I mean, freight at the moment is costing triple what anybody thought it would, and there are delays of up to a year for some products being moved from maybe manufactured in China. to ports around the world. Look, it's going to be 6 months before you get your game, and I'm probably at that point going to need to ask for $10 from each backer to get their game because I don't have the money to do it. And you get to play that card once. And if people see you as an open and transparent person, then a lot of the time they don't want you to fail. And they'll be more than happy to put that money in. Or at least if, I think I briefly mentioned in a product update one time that costs were going up, and I had people increase their pledges by $2 because they thought I was asking for help. And I didn't need it at the time because I had planned that kind of buffer zone. But some people were sending an extra $20 and saying, hey, look, I know some people won't send this money, but here, this is for them. So the community is more than willing to help if you are a person that they feel is worth helping.
That's a really reassuring message to hear. And I think we can all agree that a black turtleneck is another example of natural disaster. But Nick, take us into what these contracts say in the small print about when things really hit the fan, when we have a natural disaster, when we have these extraordinary acts of nature.
So look, when you've got something like this, as I say, whenever you have a disaster, whether it's a turtleneck or a tidal wave, people are going to read that document that I mentioned. So first of all, you're going to want to make sure that you've got it. So first of all, who's involved? Okay, is it you and the shipping company? Is it you and the customer? And usually you'll have this what we call upstream downstream obligations. So things which flow down to you, which you then pass on to the customer. That is, I've promised to sell you a board game. You've then got to kick back up to your manufacturer and say, hang on, manufacturer, you promised me 10,000 units. Where are they? And everyone's going to suddenly scurry around and look for the documents and go, what does it actually say? Um, and what does it say when we have a dispute? So you'll often find different things in contracts about who's responsible for what, but you'll also have things in there about how do we go about resolving this problem if we start fighting with each other. And I really hope your contract does have a dispute resolution clause in it, because that's how you also save a lot of money. Because if you don't have one, you basically have to go to court and sue each other. And no one likes that. Not even the lawyers. I mean, there's a big misassumption that their lawyers love it. It's like, oh, we hate it. It's just, let's get along and do some business. So the other thing in there, you might see this very foreign word, and you might have heard it a bit. It's called a force majeure. It's this idea that some
Oh,
sort of
fancy.
I know, right? Like, is it Latin? I don't know. It's probably Latin. It's law, um, and it's this idea that an intervening act has severed the contract for everyone. Now, it's not just a matter of that clause exists. It's that again, this has a mechanism to it. It says what happens when your boat gets stuck in the Suez Canal. What do you do? Okay, first of all, you usually have to tell someone, and you normally have a certain amount of time to fix it if you can. And then what do you do? What's the outcome? Can the parties just walk away and say, right, hands in the air, we each bear whatever we've spent, or is there some sort of mechanism that goes with it? Can we recover? Do we pick it up later? And the thing is, with COVID, it has been very interesting to see who understands this clause, who has this clause, who doesn't. And what I would say to anyone who's building a game and running a business, you need to be aware that consumers, which can also be other businesses, also have a lot of rights in this space. They can come back to you and say, hey, yeah, that's nice that you're trying to get out of the contract, but you can't. You have to refund me, if you want to get out of it. And so, again, that can be a big risk, and it's understanding what this is and how it works. And if I can very quickly touch on one other thing, which we've sort of been kicking around, but I suppose is the point of this thing is like, what are your avenues of funding? Because of course, if you suddenly realize that this event's happened, how are you going to get some cash in a hurry? One of the things we were talking about as sort of our pre-game beef, things as simple as a line of credit, a credit card can sometimes be enough. You might need something more like a business line of credit. You might need something like a debt financing facility where the bank actually buys your invoices from you to fund your cash flow. There are all these different mechanisms that you can get, and once again, having a business plan and once again, having a relationship with the bank. Like, yes, people work for banks too. And if your bank manager likes you, they generally tend to have a bit more like room they can deal with you. So, just like your lawyer, your accountant, your mentors, your industry, yes, the bank too, you have to, occasionally get along with. And sometimes, they can be very helpful.
Um, We've got about 30 seconds left. This seminar has been incredibly useful for me. I have learned that if I want to um, start off with a gaming idea, I need to speak with an accountant. I need to speak with a lawyer. I need to have a mentor in the industry to guide me through. I need to have a business plan. But I'm going to go around each one of our panel members and ask, don't tell me business plan, don't tell me get advice. What's the key message that you have really quickly for people looking to start up their own gaming company? Shannon, you first.
We have talked a lot about using your own money and your own resources and hiring people and investing and looking into all of these different things that you have to do, whether it be in customer service, marketing. But you can also pitch your game to a publisher who has all of these things already in place, who has all of these pre-existing relationships. And if they like your game, then they can do all of that for you. So if everything that you've just heard sounds way too complicated and way too busy, but you still want to make money from your game, look into that. And that's a whole other speech and a whole other chat, but pitch to publishers. And it's a good way to circumvent all of this that we've just talked about.
Fantastic advice. Lucy, key takeaway message.
Look, starting your own business and going into business, it's all about taking a risk. And to pull out a dictionary, an entrepreneur is about someone who takes on risks. So I say go out there and do it and have fun and be you.
Fantastic advice. I'm loving it. Nick, wrap us off with your key takeaway.
Time is something that you're going to need a lot of. You're going to need to know how to management. You're going to need to know who else who has time that is more efficient doing the thing that you don't want to do. Time is essential, and don't be afraid to take your time. Like, people take years to do this thing. You may not be an overnight success. It may take you 4 or 5 years, but I mean, you look at Afterpay that was a couple of bucks for 6 or 7 years or however long, and then it's shot to $100 and something a share in 1 year. Things can change quite rapidly when you got a good idea and it gets that amount of traction. So take a risk and just be prepared to be in for the long haul.
All right, so we've heard some fantastic advice. I'd like to thank our amazing panel, the award-winning developer, Shannon. Thank you very much.
Thank
Lucy,
you.
our chartered accountant from PwC, an absolute business saver. Thank you for your time. And Nick, our legal eagle from Ethan Group, thank you all for your advice. And for PAX 2022, I can assure you I will not be wearing a black turtleneck. Thanks all for your time and stay safe.
Thanks, Mohammed.